Welcome to another episode of Wild and Well. Today I'm talking to integrative educational therapist and nutritionist Lorraine Driscoll, all about overcoming learning disabilities, dyslexia, and ADHD. So, welcome, Lorraine. I'm so excited to have this conversation. The work that you're doing just seems incredible and so needed. But before we get into it, can you tell us one thing that you did today to take care of you or to nourish you?
Yeah, so thank you, Hillary, for having me. And one thing I did today for me, I try to make a point, no matter what, to journal and at least meditate for 15 minutes every morning. So that's what I did.
That's a really good start. If only we all did that every morning.
Yeah.
Can you share about what it is that you do and a little bit about yourself? Because you do work that is quite unique and it's interesting, like where your background has been and where it's led you.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was a teacher in the public school system for almost 15 years. And very early on in my teaching career, I got really frustrated with the education system, like a lot of teachers, and had always been drawn to more natural, holistic therapies. But I didn't end up pursuing that route when I was kind of choosing what I wanted to do with my life. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to just start taking some courses and see where this leads. And the more that I was studying holistic nutrition and integrative health and all of that stuff, everything started to make sense of why it started to make sense, I should say, of why kids were struggling and so forth. And then my daughter developed PANDAS, which is a neuroautoimmune condition. Basically, in a nutshell, it attacks the brain, specifically the basal ganglia, and can cause a lot of like OCD, ODD, ADHD, sensory issues, and so forth. And so I just dove deeper into, things like detoxification and gut health and nutrition. But we only got so far. And what really shifted things was brain work. I started learning about weak connections in the brain, underdeveloped areas, overdeveloped areas that were compensating, um, and even neurotechnologies. And all of these things were a total game changer. And so I remember thinking, like I was still teaching at the time, I was working part-time at that point, still building up my private practice. And I remember thinking, why aren't we doing this in the schools? Like I was so excited about this. So fast forward and since have done different trainings in functional neurology and integrative educational therapy and so forth. And formed Building Better Brains, my company, and the Full Potential Academy, a program that can be done internationally or virtually, I should say, or in person. So that's kind of what led me to what I'm doing, I guess, in a nutshell.
So incredible. And like I said at the beginning, it's just so needed. We need this approach. We need a more holistic approach when it comes to pretty much everything, but particularly our children's development and their learning and their brain health.
Yeah.
So, why do you think that tutoring is not enough for our children who are struggling to read or with other learning challenges?
Yeah, so that was a another kind of big thing that breakthrough for me was I admit I was like a lot of people as well as education professionals thinking these kids just need extra practice. But as I started working more with them, I was seeing some of these kids or a lot of these kids come from very supportive families. They've been in tutoring, remedial reading programs, they're doing all the things, and the kids aren't moving forward. And when I started learning about these deeper therapies that really address the weak connections at a deeper level, I started to realize, okay, this isn't about extra practice. And in fact, what was more important was that I learned, in fact, practicing the wrong way just reinforces the wrong connections. It just makes those compensations something that we go to too easily and rely on, and so forth. And we see that a lot with our dyslexic learners. We have to untrain, them whenever they are just gravitating towards wanting to do something that is easier for their brain to do. So basically, it's not that tutoring is bad, and I always like to reiterate that to parents, and I, have good collaborations with tutors. It's whenever we think that they are the only support that we can rely on. And also when they are kind of misused or misinterpreted of how much they can achieve. And tutors express that frustration of like, I'm a tutor, I'm not a miracle worker, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point. Like the tutoring is really useful. Learning the skills is really useful, but sometimes we are missing those underlying foundations, right? And
Yeah,
that's so
and
critical.
yeah, to add to that, basically when kids have learning disabilities, whether it's dyslexia or some other type of learning challenge, that's where I find tutoring typically is not enough because you have to address those weak connections. And tutoring is great at reinforcing skills from a specific subject matter, but not effective usually at building the weak connections that are actually causing that breakdown why kids can't just move ahead.
So what is missing from how we typically or conventionally understand learning disabilities?
Yeah, so I mean, if we were to like I always tell clients what I've learned and why I'm really emphasize me being an integrative educational therapist is that there's several pieces to the puzzle. And the first thing that I work on when I'm working with kids is we look at, do you have the right fuel for your brain? So, do you have the right nutrients and so forth? And then also, is there the wrong fuel, or is there things that are creating irritations or even inflammation? So whether it's not a great diet that's inflammatory, whether there's pathogenic gut bacteria or stuff going on with the gut, or actual toxins, like a lot of the research shows a lot of children with learning disabilities test much higher for heavy metals and pesticides compared to kids who don't. So I like to look at that first. How is that impacting the brain? And then next looking at the actual weak connections in terms of the foundational pieces that impact auditory processing and phonemic awareness and processing speed and visual processing. All of those things you can't just practice if you don't even have the connections for in the first place. So I feel like there's this really foundational piece that we're missing. I always tell parents there's like a learning pyramid, and at the top of the learning pyramid is the academics, the subjects. And that's where we tend to start with tutoring and practice, but we need to start way at the bottom. Think of it as a house. And we can't put a roof on a house when there's no foundation or a very poor foundation.
When you were speaking about that pyramid there, I just thought, imagine if all schools
Right.
integrated this. That would just be incredible. It would
Yeah.
help all the children because as much as I imagine this really helps kids who are really struggling, kids who are just mildly struggling could benefit from it as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. And teachers are always my best clients in the sense that they'll always come to me and be, okay, we need to get going because I know that like what we're doing in the school system right now is not going to cut the mustard. And then they'll go through my program and they'll be like, okay, 3 months later, 4 months later, they're telling me how now they're doing the stuff at circle time, whether it's like reflex integration exercise or sensory motor exercises and so forth. So teachers, I want to just say, are amazing. Most of them want to implement this stuff. It's just, limited time, resources, and training that's preventing that from happening, but it would be amazing for sure.
Yeah, that will be the future.
Hmm. Totally.
So when you talk about the foundations, what are they? You're mentioning the reflexes, gut, toxins, things like that. What are the main foundations that we need to address before we can move on to those other levels like academics?
Right. So, for sure, all that nutrition stuff, gut health, toxicity, and so forth. So after we've addressed what I call like the biology of learning, which is that biochemical piece, in terms of the foundation, reflexes are foundational. Those primitive reflexes. Do you want me to explain that? Because I feel like not all your listeners will probably know what that is.
Yeah, it's something
Yeah.
that I'm totally fascinated by. I'm taking a course on it. I've had somebody on the podcast to talk about it,
Oh,
but
okay.
I would love for you to mention it because most listeners probably haven't listened to that one episode. So yes,
Right.
please explain it.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, to keep it simple, when we're born, we have these infant reflexes that help or assist with survival and development. And what happens is they should integrate at various points during infancy. And if they don't integrate, they create these, I call them brain blocks to put it simply. But basically, they exist in the lower brain. And if those reflexes don't integrate, then it makes it very hard for the cortex, which is behind our forehead, to do what it needs to do because it's busy inhibiting these reflexes that should have integrated in infancy. So the way I explain it to parents is to think of a pop-up, like I don't know about you, but sometimes I go on websites, you're looking for something and there are these like stupid pop-ups and you're like, okay, where's the X? Like how do I make this thing go away? And every now and then I can't find the X. I'm like, okay, I guess this is like a spammy website. I give up. I'm out of here. I'm going to check this out somewhere else. Or if we're able to look, we're like, okay, there's the X. Maybe we haven't had a lot of sleep today and we haven't been eating well and we've had an argument with someone and we just don't have the patience. So we're like, okay, whatever, I'm going to another website. And that's how it is for our kids. So they have these reflexes and sometimes their cortex is better at quickly inhibiting and efficiently inhibiting these reflexes. And other times it's not. And the days that it's not so great is the days that kids are like, I don't understand. I could read so well last week for this test, and this week it was so much harder. And so that's why we have kids who are, and parents are so confused of, I don't understand why they have good days and bad days. And it's all these neurological process of how much stress is on the nervous system to be able to do that. So the long and the short of it is reflexes really inhibit the cortex from fully doing its job because it's having to show up to do a job that's considered more important in terms of survival.
Yeah, they really are so important. And the more I learn about them, it seems like if they're not integrated, they really get in the way of so many different things, don't they?
Yeah, everything from attention, learning, and so forth, but like even, sensory processing to fine motor and gross motor skills. Even there was a dad, I assessed his son, and his son wasn't overly cooperative that day. So the dad's like, hey, let's do me as well. And, he'll probably be more willing. And then we found out dad had like an extremely retained TLR reflex, which dad always had crazy motion sickness his whole life. And that just made so much sense. And I said, you need to work on your TLR as well, Dad, so that other people can drive and you don't have to be behind the wheel for every single road trip. So, and that's the thing, right? Like I know when I did my training, it was like in person, and we were like, oh my goodness, this is like so crazy how I have this retained. I think I had a mildly retained TLR, and then there was something else. Can't remember what it was now. And so if for we are like one or two that's mildly retained, we generally can function, but we might never know why we have this particular weakness of I'm just not very good at this, or I always struggled with that, versus someone who has a learning challenge and has, multiple reflexes that are moderately to severely retained, that's going to create a lot more breakdown.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the foundations are the gut, the reflexes. Are there other foundations there?
Yeah. So, for example, so the other thing I really like to look at is brain hemisphere organization or weaknesses, if you will. So, some kids will have, a really beautifully overdeveloped left brain, like the kid I was working with yesterday. He's like so smart, just gets stuff so quickly. It's unbelievable, but he has such a hard time focusing and regulating his behavior, which is really typical of a left brain overdeveloped kid who, has a very weak right brain. So the visual cortex is more on the right side of the brain, the auditory cortex is on the left, and you can totally see that with this little guy. He's so smart, so good at so many things, and yet he even whenever we assessed him, the one thing that was extremely weak was his visual processing, which is on his, right side of his brain. And then, of course, the self-regulation piece. Whereas a lot of parents who have dyslexic children are very familiar with that, right brain overdevelopment, where they're maybe really good at art or Legos or sports and so forth. They have really good spatial skills, for example, but the reading and the language and the writing, which takes place on the left side of the brain, is much more challenging because that side is underdeveloped. So basically, what I look at is there weaknesses and how can we stimulate the weaker side? And I always tell parents it's not going to change who your child is as a person. It's just going to, I say it helps them step into more of who they are because now they don't have these challenges holding them back. So there's that. And then Then there's like things like the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that has more neurons than any other part of the brain. It's where learning and movement takes place. The timing mechanism, the timing mechanism is often off in these kids at the millisecond level. Some kids are rabbits, it's too fast, and some kids are turtles, it's too slow. But in either situation, that can impact everything from processing speed to how quickly they're going to kind of fluently read through a passage. And it's also going to affect things like sports and motor control. If we have slow timing, if you think of like why we don't want people drinking when they're impaired, right? There's that delayed response. We need to have a really good response time. So that is, very, very important for the brain development. So those are like kind of foundational pieces. And then as we go further up, there's the cognitive aspects that are still not academic. And so those cognitive aspects are more things like actual, processing speed, visual processing, working memory, auditory memory, visual memory. So those I build up with actual cognitive therapies that can feel a little more like tutoring, but still not tutoring because we're not focusing on a subject. We're actually doing different drills to exercise those weaker areas.
So do you start with the foundations, get those going well, and then you move to the cognitive skills and then up to the tutoring, or do you interchange them as you go depending on the person?
So it does depend on the person, but definitely, like for example, in my practice, we do some functional testing before I jump into stuff. And I've learned to do that with everyone first, just because I've had kids, we start moving along, and then 4 months in, we're like, hey, why aren't things shifting or clicking with this kid the way it is with others? And then we find out maybe there's high aluminum or high like glyphosate or high lead. I've had that like more than once. So now I just do testing with all of them to start, and that can just really rule things out and not end up with a child who has what I call education or therapy trauma or burnout, where they're like, they've shut down. A lot of them, by the time they come to me, are already in that space or somewhat teetering in that space because they've been dragged to tutoring and OT and, all these great places. But what I tell parents is it's the wrong action at the wrong time. And so then kids get burnt out and convinced. To them, it's really reaffirming to them, I'm dumb. Because I've been in tutoring for 5 years and I can't learn, and my peers can learn and they don't even have to do tutoring. And my job sometimes is to sit with them and help them understand it's not because you're dumb. It's because really well-intentioned people just don't have the right information and we're not doing the right things at the right time. So we need to work. It's like saying if you just keep running on that broken leg, eventually you're going to get really good at running, where we actually have to work on fixing the leg. So basically we start with that, and then always we work on primitive reflexes first. Depending on the severity of that will determine if we can move a little further along with cognitive therapies and so forth. So it is definitely a case by case basis.
It seems like such a good approach, like so integrative and holistic, addressing so many different aspects so kids can actually improve in many areas. I imagine they see a lot of improvements outside of just their learning disabilities going away. Like, what are some other positive benefits that you see your kids get unintentionally?
Yeah, I love that part actually, because, and I get that both with whether it's the kid who had eczema and now the eczema's gone because we've healed the gut, or the kid who the parents are like, oh my God, they're swimming it. They're like now finally grasping swimming because, there's certain reflexes that'll really affect their coordination for swimming. Or I had one kid, my favorite story, we were doing all these exercises, neurotechnologies, and it was all for behavior. He kept getting suspended from school for behavior. And not only did the school call at one point and say, we just want to say thank you for finally putting him on medication. We can really see the difference. And the parents were like, he's not on medication. So that was the first piece. And then the second piece was he actually went from the B team to the A team in hockey. And the coach of the B team was kind of insulted and was like, you must have hired a private coach. Like nobody improved that quickly. And so this kid's coordination and reaction time and so many other things just like totally, launched forward with that. So I love it when that happens because they're just really, yeah, pleasant side effects. So.
Yeah, it's incredible. Then that must be so nice for the children and the parents too to
Yeah.
see that and really motivating to continue.
Exactly. Yes, 100%.
So if there's parents listening to this thinking this could help my kids, like where do they start? Are there small changes that parents can do to start addressing some of these foundations or the cognitive pieces? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so definitely I like 100% I say start like look at nutrition. And I am not someone who says, no gluten, no sugar, no dairy. It doesn't necessarily have to be that rigid. For sure, I sometimes work with kids who are very, like low functioning autism, and there's a lot going on, and they do so much better with that type of diet. But that does not have to be that restrictive. But more protein at breakfast is huge. A lot of my kids, I talk to them and they're like, I have a bagel or a Pop Tart in the morning. That's like just so hard for the brain in terms of like managing that blood sugar and the focus and the concentration and so forth. So, start simple. That's the other piece I say is if you're shifting diet, don't try to do a whole diet overhaul. It's really easy to just be like, I'm going to do this. But for most people, what works better is, okay, what is the meal that you're most concerned about? For me, it's always like, let's just start with breakfast and let's optimize breakfast and let's get really good at making breakfast easy and awesome and nutritious. And then what's the next thing we can do? Is it lunch? Is it dinner? So definitely that. And then when it comes to actual brain stuff, I mean, definitely working on integrating reflexes. Um, and as there's different people you can see, whether it's an OT, educational therapist, and so forth. If for some reason that's not possible, then what I tell parents is you can maybe learn about it online on how to do that. And the other thing is like not to underestimate the power of things like dance class or martial arts or gymnastics. Most of my little boys prefer martial arts. Most of my little girls prefer dance. They like martial arts too. It depends on the age of the boy if they're going to take up dance, but um, that is just those activities are so great because they really require complex movements and uh, dance specifically really taps into the timing mechanism in the brain, which is very, very critical. Most of my kids have, just off with the timing, whether it's too slow or too fast. And so that is also like I have a kiddo. The parents have him in what do you call it? Like kind of like Highland drumming. So there's so many different ways or music class, like learning an instrument can be really helpful as well. And I say that because for our kids who have therapy burnout, trying to tap into something that might be more fun and interesting can be really critical as well, as opposed to them always feeling like they're doing an intervention. Um, so that's definitely where I would start for sure.
Yeah, those are great ideas. And I think you're absolutely right. Martial arts, gymnastics, dance, those are so good for even for the primitive reflex integration. For
Yeah.
one of my kids, it's the Moro, I believe. That's the startle one that he has held on to longer than he should. And gymnastics is really helpful with that because his coach helps him open up his arms when he's upside down, and it helps him do like those cross crawl like movements that integrate both sides of the brain together. And yeah,
Right.
it's so helpful. And I think that's smart to have parents do those sort of things. So it's not just all about going to see a professional to help with skills, right? It can be so much more fun to learn a new skill like martial arts instead to learn all
Right.
this.
Yeah.
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 And what about the nervous system? How do you address nervous system dysregulation and how does that impact their learning and behavior?
Yeah. Yeah, I should have mentioned that sooner actually. So that's one of the first things we do work on when we start, making modifications with nutrition and so forth, is working on the nervous system because as you probably know, a lot of my kids have dysregulated nervous systems. Um, whether that's just because of, reflexes and other stuff from infancy and on, but also from school trauma or learning trauma, whatever you want to call it. So, One way I do that, I mean, for sure, reflex work can help, but even before reflex work, like I'll do like rhythmic movements, which is a very somatic nervous system regulating type, process. And then sometimes I will actually do other types somatic exercises with them and so forth, which I dived pretty deep into a few years ago when I had Lyme disease and my nervous system was super dysregulated, and I couldn't believe how much the somatic exercises helped. So sometimes that's the first place to start. Oftentimes, like almost always, that's where I start, even if it's just for a few weeks, and then start easing into, other things like primitive reflexes and so on. So.
So what does that look like? Like for a listener, what does the somatic movement or strategies look
Yeah,
like?
so there's so many, as you probably know, but I mean, basically the idea is that when our nervous system is dysregulated, we have this like survival energy in our body. And when I say energy, I always like to say to parents, this isn't even esoteric. This is like survival energy in terms of like, in an extreme case, what is it? Why is it that a mother is able to lift a car in a crazy situation and her able to get her 4-year-old out from under that car? And that is that her body just pumped out so much survival energy and she was able to use that energy to lift a car. Right. And so whenever we have, smaller traumas, whatever you want to say, or we're just dysregulated, we have all of the survival energy inside of us. And so somatic exercises is like a body-based therapy that helps to discharge that survival energy. And we don't have to understand it in a cognitive way. We just have to release it. We don't have to try to like think about it and where is this from and why did this happen? And that's what I love about it, is not having to say, whether it's sometimes working with even moms who have very dysregulated nervous systems, we don't have to try to understand it at a cognitive level. And so one thing that I'll do is, I mean, there's the simple one like the hug, where you're just kind of holding yourself. I like to do the right hand under the left armpit and then your right hand on your left shoulder, and you're just holding yourself and you might rock. There's that one. There's the bilateral tapping of one, you're crossing your hands over and you're tapping opposite shoulders. Um, Sometimes it's just like I'll put on like I especially it works better in the summer, but if I'm like tank tops or shorts, just gently like rubbing your hands as if you're washing your hands. And you just keep doing that. And then just working up slowly up the arm, or you're slowly rubbing one arm. And you'll know it's working, unless you're super dysregulated, which can happen. It did happen for me with Lyme, because you'll start experiencing a discharge of that survival energy. And that will show up as things like yawning, I just feeling more relaxed, being able to take a deeper breath. So there'll be these really subtle signs that your body is actually discharging. Yawning's a huge one. And so you can do the whole thing, like you can like wash your body basically, where you just, and you really want to pay attention to the sensation in your body. So you're not in your head, you're really focusing of how does my hand feel when I rub my other hand? Does that feel warm? Does it feel sticky? Does it feel grippy? And so forth. So there's a ton of somatic exercises. That's a whole field on its own, and I'm not certified in it or anything, but I am very familiar and know quite a bit about it because of my journey with Lyme. And I find that can really help to settle kids and moms. And I say that because like when I do my program with families, usually the moms need that support as well because they are so dysregulated, often from dealing with a high needs child. So
Yeah, I can imagine that would be so beneficial for like
yeah.
everybody involved. And it is challenging. Parenting is can be hard enough, but if you have a child that is going through struggles like learning difficulties, behavioral challenges, or ADHD, that just adds extra to the parent, and their nervous system can be a bit dysregulated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some signs that parents should look out for to have an idea if their children could benefit from looking at these foundations and these cognitive skills?
Yeah. So I will actually tell parents, if your child has an actual diagnosis, say of ADHD or learning disability or something else like that, 100%. They benefit from that. The research shows 100% of kids with learning and behavior challenges have retained reflexes. Um, but also, if there's like a suspected diagnosis, I would say about 50% of my moms will say, you know what? I don't need to get a diagnosis. I know there's something going on and I just want to address it. Definitely, even if you suspect, and I say that also because sometimes parents are in a position where they can't pay for the psych ed out of pocket or they can't get it at this time, and they know time is of the essence and they just want to move forward. So I always tell moms, I'm big on listening to your mama's instinct. Um, so yeah, I would say to start with that. And yeah,
Yeah. Listening to our instinct generally has us go in the right direction, doesn't it?
yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah.
And do you work with children who only have mild impairments, or do you generally tend to see the kids that are struggling quite a bit more?
It's very mixed. So I definitely work with kids who have just mild, reading challenges and so forth. And then I mean, actually, I just feel like I have to share this because this is another type of challenge that really slips through the cracks is the gifted child who struggles with certain aspects. So everyone assumes because someone's gifted, they're not going to struggle. Like, for example, a couple weeks ago, I just assessed a gifted child, super gifted, but then has really poor working memory. And so just because someone is gifted doesn't mean they won't struggle in school. And that can create a lot of anxiety because there's this performance piece, especially if they know of the diagnosis. So there's that. And then I also work with kids who have, you know, severe kind of low functioning autism to Down syndrome, yeah, to different kind of more severe delays. So it is definitely a mix.
Yeah, that it makes sense because these are skills and like health pieces that affect all of us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And my thing is always, no matter the diagnosis, there's always room for improvement. Like that's a big thing. I have a lot of moms that come to me. They might get the diagnosis from the psych ed assessment and they feel really disempowered and discouraged because they think that that's final, like that's what this is. This is what is all they can expect or hope for their child. And I tell them, I have to, my part of my job is helping them to understand neuroplasticity and that kids can actually, like Dr. Ruben Foystern had, someone who went from an IQ of 35 to 100, does it happen every time? No, I like never want to lead parents to have false hope because there's nothing worse. But there's so much potential whenever we do the right therapies of how even children who have even very genetic like Down syndrome with a certain cognitive therapy, it's been shown over and over they can increase 16 IQ points. So they're just going to function better, and that's what parents want. Every mom I talk to, yes, they want their child to read or manage their behavior, but ultimately they want their child to have confidence, and they want to know that their child can function independently when they're not around.
Do you find that it's hard to go against the more established narrative that there aren't changes and improvements that we can make for some of these diagnoses in your work, or do you not see that so much? You just have parents that are so super keen and want to work on these.
Um, for the most part, I think I just tend to attract the parents who have that awareness of neuroplasticity, and there has to be something deeper. It can be, I would say, maybe somewhat comes up a bit of a challenge, but it was definitely whenever I was in the school system, when I was still teaching and knew this information, it was so hard. It was really, really hard because I remember I was learning all this stuff, and then I remember my vice principal at the time, who such a lovely, well-intentioned woman said, you just need to like let him be. She's like, let him use a laptop. He's never going to learn to write well. She's like, you just need to accept that. And I was just like, I just looked at her and I'm like, I'm just not going to say anything. Because I knew that she really believed that. And I understand why she believes that because I went through that same type of school system that was just all we can hope for these kids are IEPs and assistive technology and maybe some tutoring to move them along. But for the most part now, because I'm on my own in my own practice, yeah, I'm pretty fortunate where I can attract those types of clients. But absolutely, there are people who it's more sometimes the moms who are just feeling defeated. And almost, I get the sense, and I've been there as a parent, where you don't want to create false hope. You don't want to get your hopes up or get your child's hopes up and disappoint them. And so that's a big piece too, is managing expectations of, hey, I'm not promising the moon, but what if we could make this much easier, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what sort of commitment is it for families? Is this a lot of hours of work each week for them? Like, what does it actually look like when you work with children and their parents?
Right. So that will depend to some extent on what's going on, and also if parents sometimes want to do an intensive, because maybe the child's being homeschooled or is not in school at that moment. But generally speaking, it's about half an hour a day. And parents always seem shocked that it's not longer, because there's half the time they're like at the dinner table for 90 minutes soldiering it out with phonics or something. And I explained to them, look, it's like when you like learn to play guitar, it's not about sitting for an hour and a half playing guitar. And I know this because I learned to play guitar in my 30s. It's about you get further faster with 15 minutes even twice a day than trying to soldier it out for an hour and a half. So neuroplasticity isn't about hours and hours and hours. It's about consistency. So it's the biggest piece is just having that consistency, which is why I do the programs, because I find parents like that. I don't even like the word accountability because it sounds like someone's in trouble, but motivation piece where I'm there to hold their hand and troubleshoot and keep them going and so forth. So it's consistency more than anything that will get kids far.
That piece of accountability, for lack of a better word, is so key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you need that. You need to have somebody there to check in with, to remind you why you're doing it when you're feeling demotivated. So I think that's really
Yes.
great that you have that built into the work.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and 30 minutes does seem doable if it's going to help your child and therefore help the whole family.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing is I always tell families as much as possible do this as a family because not only will it benefit all of you, but it's better to do it as a family because oftentimes that child already feels singled out. And then it's like, why do I have to do this when my other sibling or siblings don't have to? And parents do that when they do that and they bring the other siblings in, they're like, oh, little Lucy's whatever is actually better now. So I'm glad we did it with her too. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, with the primitive reflex exercises, I have both my kids do it and I just talk about it like it's like sports training and
Right.
they have fun. Like we were doing this morning with my eldest and my youngest was like, "Is it my turn?" So you can actually make it fun.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
share a case or two of an interesting client that you worked with?
Yeah, sure. I have so many awesome stories now. I feel like I've been at this long enough. So one of my favorite stories is a kid who he was 13 years old. He was actually my first client. And I feel like I got baptized by fire with him. But so he was my first client and he was 13 years old. And when I assessed him, he could read 5 words. And when I say read, like I can't even say he could read 5 words. Like I was like, okay, we managed to get 5 words out of him. Like this is really bad. He had sensory processing issues, he had speech issues. I'm sure he had like a mild intellectual disability as well. It wasn't just your run-of-the-mill dyslexia, which is what mom told me on the phone. So, um, he within, I would say, probably 4 weeks of doing, now this wasn't intensive, this was a summer intensive. They said, wow, like nobody's asking him to repeat words anymore. Like his speech isn't perfect, but they're not asking, it's not like totally like, okay, what did he just say? And at the time, I wasn't focusing on speech. I was all new to this. And mom's like, is this part of the program? Like, I don't know. It's like, sure, why not? Um, because our thing was just improving, auditory processing and phonemic awareness. And of course, speech would improve. Of course, like I can't even believe I didn't know that then. So then he went back to school in about 3.5 months later, and he had gone up 15 reading levels in about 3.5 months. Like his letter reversals were totally gone. He was blending sounds like nobody's business. The school had assessed him and called mom and was like, who's his tutor? And mom's like, it's not a tutor, and so forth. But yeah, so that's one of my favorite stories because he's 13. And I have even kids that are older than that. Parents came to me, we just wanted to graduate high school. And like one of these kids, he graduated at the top of his class in college. And then on top of that, he got picked up by a big animation studio in the US. Um, so, and this kid, when he came to me, was 16 or 17. So I like to share those stories because people will often say to me, there's so much mom guilt of I waited too long, it's too late, I should have seen it sooner, how come I didn't act? We all feel like that. I have moms of 4-year-olds saying that to me. So whether they're 4 years old or like 17 years old, there's always there's neuroplasticity is for everyone. Nobody's exempt from neuroplasticity. So those are like two of my favorite stories, but if you ask me about specific diagnosis, I could get more specific.
No, those are great. And it is so nice to hear the stories of older kids, of teenagers, because I think you're absolutely right. We've all had those thoughts of, I haven't gotten to this early enough. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
going to be able to make the improvements for my child that I would like to see.
right.
So do you work with people online and in person? Is that correct?
Yeah, so I have I work with people internationally, and then I also have in-person office in Ottawa.
And does it look different in person versus online? Like, how does that differ?
Not really, and honestly, like people start with me in person, and then even they will be like, okay, for convenience sake, can we do a Zoom call instead? So not always, but like that definitely happens. So it doesn't really impact the efficacy of the program. But it's just I wanted to do the in person because really launched online and did quite well with that. But I missed seeing people. I'm an extrovert, so it's like, okay, I need to see people in person, and I miss that connection with the kids and so forth. So
Yeah, I imagine that that could be a lot nicer for the children in person, more
yeah, for sure.
engaging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And was there anything that you wanted to talk about here or that you think would be really important for listeners to know that we didn't talk about?
Um, I guess the main thing that I always reiterate is that you know, just because something is a diagnosis doesn't mean it's permanent. I don't claim to be curing diagnosis left, right, and center, but there is a lot of potential. The brain is plastic at any age. Like that's my number one thing I like to drive home. And the second thing is just to bring in that integrative approach because it's never usually one thing, and you need to bring in those parts. And a lot of parents sometimes will come to me and say, like, we've tried everything. We've even tried some of the things in your program. Like, for example, I have a vision therapy component built into my program. And some of them will say, we've done vision therapy. And I'm like, oh, did you integrate reflexes first? Did you work on core development and cerebellum? And they'll often say, what's that? So that right action at the right time. So sometimes when you think you've tried everything, and I know how that feels because I have been there a dozen times as a parent, um, it's sometimes you actually haven't tried everything. Sometimes you've tried everything conventional, or you think you've tried everything natural or holistic, or integrative. And sometimes it's a matter of how you've done it. So uh, yeah, there's a lot of variables that come in when I find parents come to me feeling kind of powerless and so forth.
Yeah, I can see that. And if we try things at the wrong time before we have the foundations,
Yeah,
it's not going to work as well, like you mentioned earlier.
exactly. Yeah.
And you mentioned their core work. That's a really important piece of this. Can you explain why working on our core strengths really helps, like the nervous system and all these things?
Yeah. So I should have mentioned that as I was saying, like, oh, I should have mentioned that whenever you asked, what are some things we can do today? Like, number one thing, core strength. My kids have such weak core muscles, many of them. And for my kids who have like reading or writing challenges, core strength is so important for those not only gross but fine motor skills. If you don't have core strength, you will lack those fine motor skills to track words on a page or to write legibly, and so forth. It also will really impact the nervous system in terms of self-regulation as well as focus and concentration. So if the kids kind of squirmy at the dinner table or in class constantly, That's because I mean, there's a few layers to that, but definitely core strength is one of them. And so, getting them a better core strength is going to get them to be able to focus better because they're not so busy kind of moving around trying to manage their vestibular system. So, yeah, core strength, like hands down, can be such a game changer for so many things for sure.
Yeah, amazing. Are there certain resources like books or podcasts or trainings that you recommend parents look into if they're interested in learning more about any of these foundations or even like the different layers of the pyramid that we've talked about?
Um, so for podcasts, um, probably I think have there's I just started listening to Brainy Moms. And then there's well, Dr. Malilo. So his book actually is really good. Disconnected Kids, sorry. Um, and then Symphony of Reflexes, like if you're interested in reflex work, as well as Dr. Blomberg's book, The Rhythmic Movement Method. So yeah, those are some of my, like, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Yeah,
Yeah, those sound great. And that book, Disconnected Kids, is a book that I think all practitioners that work with kids and all parents would really benefit from reading.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. And how can parents find out more about the work that you do and work with you if they're interested?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in all the places. So you can find me on Instagram, Building Better Brains, Facebook, Building Better Brains, and same with YouTube. And then my website is lorrainedriscoll.com. So yeah, you can find me in all the places. You can book an advanced brain screening or just a one-to-one clarity call, or just shoot me a message on, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or an email. So
And you work with people through a program, is that correct? Or are
yeah,
there different ways?
typically, there's depending, like I do have a few options. If they head to my website, they'll see a few different options. Like my program is my main thing. They can book a clarity call, and then I do have if they want to do an advanced brain screening to start, to see like what are the areas of breakdown and so forth. And then from there we can kind of determine what needs to happen.
Yeah, amazing. Do you have any plans for making this work even bigger, like mentoring people so there's more people like you out there? Because this is so, so needed, but it's hard to find.
Yeah, right. I've been asked that a few times and I've thought about it. I'm just not sure where I want to like how to navigate all that at this point because I'm so busy with with my clients. But I definitely, to be honest, I would love to be able to get into like even shifting it at a ministry level in Ontario, for example, of like everyone should be doing reflex integration in kindergarten, like they do in the Waldorf schools. I know I have a friend whose child was in a Waldorf school and they screen them for reflexes as soon as they start and work on integrating that. So this isn't some crazy idea, and ultimately also even working, I like would love if I could get in at like a teachers college to help young teachers learn about these things and how to identify and so forth. And I do have a lot of very eager teachers who are like, hey, how can I learn more about this and how can I help my students? I know most people are really frustrated with the education system, not just in Canada, but pretty much all of the Western world. Um, and I always tell them most teachers are totally their heart's in it. They just don't have the time, training, or resources. So
Yeah, it's more of a systemic issue rather than like the teacher themselves having an
exactly.
issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you do pursue that because it is so, so needed. And I think it would make it so much easier for children, but it would also make it a lot more enjoyable at school. And there would probably be less burnout for teachers as well because they wouldn't be having to deal with as much um, of the behavioral challenges and the additional learning support that some children would require.
Yeah. 100%. Exactly. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do, for the kids and families that you're helping, and for the time and knowledge that you've given us today. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.